So, Eve, you and I are both big believers that creativity is necessary for your health and your well being and your full expression of humanity. And so does everybody listening. But the thing that I encounter the most, in fact, I just encountered it with someone this morning, is claiming the space and time and agency for that creativity. I can't believe 30 years into doing this work, it is still so hard for so many women that I work with. So even though we have your new book, Finding Your Unicorn Space, and you can see my tags in it, I want to rewind and talk about your first book, your New York Times bestseller, Fair Play, and just talk a little bit about how the fair play system can help people in partnership make that time to find their unicorn space.
Well, I think it's such a great question, right? Jen, it's like same shit, different decade, right? Where
Yeah, same shit, different decade.
the hurdles seem to never, the more productive we get in terms of technology, it seems the paradox is we keep getting less and less time and more busy, which you talk about. And I think that is especially hard for women. Unicorn Space, which is a book about creativity, as you just mentioned so beautifully, and fair play, what they have in common is, as you said, the hurdles. And I think it really started for me, when you think about the hurdles, it started for me with when Zach, my first son, 13 years ago, was handed to me. Because what I remember about that day in the hospital was it was the first day where my name was gone. It erased like a cloud in the wind. It basically, this labor and delivery nurse handed me Zach and said, "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling?" And I do remember that the same day my friend visited me in the hospital, and this was 13 years ago when those little charms were really in fashion. And she gave me a circle charm that said Mom on it. And I proudly put that around my neck. And then what I remember 3 years later, when Fair Play was written, it talks about how my marriage almost ended over a text my husband Seth sent me that said, "I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries." But at the same time that I was having a terrible time with the division of labor, of unpaid labor, invisible work in my home, being the she-fault for literally every single thing in my household, 2/3 or more of what it takes to run a household, it falls on women, a statistic I was living, but I didn't undeniably know about at the time. At that same time, I remember sitting down at a preschool transition class where the preschool teacher looked at me and said, "This is your support system. Look around. These are the people that are going to help you, be there for you in a pinch. They're going to be the ones who know you better than anybody." And Jen, I look around and I look at my name tag, which said Zach's mom. And I remember thinking, okay, these are the people who are going to know me best. They don't even know my fucking name. And so that's where I think the problem starts. I think it starts with the fact that women, when we're young, we're taught we could be anything. We have dreams. We have huge creative dreams, a ton of ideas. We start to put ourselves to those ideas. And then slowly we fade and we erase, and society tries to erase us and they take away our names. And then they say, well, you're allowed to be a parent. You're allowed to be a partner. You're allowed to be a professional. Maybe in some states we'll encourage you in the workforce, but most of the time we don't. And then there's no time left for us. Our most valuable currency, our time, we've been conditioned since birth to not only give our names away, to give our identities away, but to give away our time, our most valuable currency, for free. And that's where I think that's where it starts.
And when I'm thinking of those moments when your name was taken, it is such a moment of, maybe not, let's just try this out. Is that a moment of the patriarchy coming in the systems that we don't even see? Like, the nurse doesn't think I'm erasing your name. The nurse thinks, well, you're so happy about this new identity. How many ways it just seems baked in to how we interact with each other, how we dismiss each other.
I love that term baked in because it's so beautiful when you think about, could we bake our way out of this? That's a fun, creative way to do. Patriarchy cakes. Yeah, we could start a little side
They'll have a
business.
file
Yeah,
on the
yes,
inside.
exactly. A weapon inside, But it's really interesting because yes, I do think that's the issue, that it's baked in. It's baked in, and it because your beautiful work. You literally do this every single day, where you extract permission to be unavailable from our roles from women. If we already had the permission to be unavailable from our roles, we would have leisure time for things that make us uniquely us. But it's subversive. I remember talk about baked in. I remember, and it's not just men, right? Women become complicit in our own oppression. It happens.
Yeah.
Because we're taught, again, to give away that currency for free. I remember really being excited about this idea for fair play, this idea that, no one's really talked about the home as our most important organization. And I really want to research this. This is before I knew it was going to be a book. And I remember taking Sundays off. And as I would sit there with these interesting beta tested cards, I had this huge stack of cards. I remember some people, almost inevitably, somebody would ask me about what those cards are. And then I get into a conversation with all genders, all ages. Well, what are you doing here? Oh, you have a family. Wow, you have 2 kids. That's amazing. Who's watching those kids?
Right there.
Their father. And it was a shock. A man can take care of his children by himself. I could never do that. I would never be able to leave my partner for the day. And so I was like, what is the point of this conversation? Are you shaming me to go back to that relationship? Even one time, one woman said to me, well, what is your husband going to do if you work all during the week and you're not even with him on the weekends? I'm like, are you implying that he's going to leave me? I don't understand where this conversation is going. So this is baked into our daily conversation over Starbucks.
Absolutely. I
can't escape it.
I wish I had $10 for every time someone has told me I'm so lucky my husband cooks. I mean, they never say to him, you're so lucky your wife makes money.
Or I'm so lucky that I have a partner that supports my dreams.
Right.
So what does that even mean, right? That they're okay with you bringing money into the household? It's this bizarre, the opposite of abundance, which is where your work lives. And I think creativity work lives. It lives in a place of abundance, in a place of happiness and meaning where they intersect. And so what's been interesting for me as I started to really go on this journey to understand the erasure of women was that sort of where creativity ended up. Why a second book about the division of labor between heteronormative, couples. How did a creativity book come second? It was because ultimately, when I started to look at places that people in the longest longitudinal study, probably now of unpaid labor over 10 years, when I interviewed over and over again in 17 countries, Jen, what I heard was, how do you feel about the home life? The 2 words I heard most often, and we know this now because we have a word cloud from those cool softwares that can bring up words as you type in: overwhelm and boredom. Overwhelm, and that's a deadly combination. So when I start to think about, well, what's the opposite of overwhelm and boredom, I start to really look at positive psychology. And what was interesting about true positive psychology, not the sort of the co-opted kind that, is like gratitude journaling yourself to death, but the real positive psychology is that we need experiences that bring us happiness and meaning together. And often what was starting to happen was in my interviews, especially as the pandemic dragged on, was I saw people reporting happiness without meaning. Well, I escape, Eve. I binge watch Netflix. I use mommy juice. Edibles are really fun for me right now, right? So I would get this happiness without meaning, sort of these hedonic pursuits. And then I would hear a lot of meaning without happiness. I know this is great that I'm teaching my kids the multiplication tables. I know it's important that I step in to educate them when the schools can't. Meaning without happiness, which is often associated with caregiving. But I was really looking at, when do people get happiness and meaning together? And often it's in these creative pursuits that make them them. And we put them at the bottom of our list. And that's why I believe that so many of us feel overwhelmed and bored.
So we come back though to the central question, well, maybe not the central question, but the first question, which is then how do I make time?
Yeah.
How do I give myself permission? How do, as you said, extract permission to explore my unicorn space?
So I'm going to say this loud and a lot of different times. Creativity is not fucking optional. It is not optional. And if you continue to think it's optional, then you're going to continue to have a life of overwhelm and boredom. And that is not anything I wish for anybody. And this is not a privileged conversation. In fact, what was happening in my research was that the people who identified as being in 9.9% of socioeconomic status ended up being the people who could not tell me what their unicorn space was, what their acts of what I call unicorn space is 3 C's, right? It's curiosity, connection, and completion. They could not tell me about things that they did that brought them any of those 3 things. And it was really depressing. And so I think what we have to realize is that, as in the spirit of Peter Drucker or all the management consultants out there, all the productivity people, you cannot manage what you don't measure. We have to add daily flourishing, which is linked to creative pursuits, to our practice of our life. It's, to me, it's a more important practice than meditation, exercise, because it brings important things, not just curiosity, but as we said, it brings connection. A creative life is a connected life, as you've talked about too. It's not Van Gogh cutting his ear off by himself. A creative life is a connected life. It also helps us combat loneliness. We know women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety disorders. We are twice as likely to not ask for help. We are twice as likely to use medication in hedonic ways to escape from our lives. And that is just, it's not a life that I can wish on anybody, even my worst enemy.
What's the difference between self-care and unicorn space?
Well, it was really back to that happiness and meaning. This comes from the research. So, I'm not making this up, but we see now that pursuits where there's not a sharing component don't have the same mental and physical health benefits as pursuits done just solely in benefit of yourself. So what I mean by that is a spin class is great. That's the baseline. A drink with a friend is great. Self-care, real self-care, not modified wellness. I'm not talking about what people sell you to, like, the CBD or oil pedicure.
Right. The scented candle.
I said that once, and people are like, "Oh, I want to have that." I'm like, "No, you don't want to have that. You don't want that. You want to walk on the dog with your, a walk with your dog on the beach or whatever. Stand your feet on the sand. Self-care, of course, we need that type of, self-care. We do need friendships, but the beauty of a unicorn space, when you think of it as a cycle of curiosity, connection, and completion, all I can tell you, Jen, is in this longitudinal study now over a decade, there's a feeling. We say, well, what does the feeling evoke for you? So sometimes it's almost easier to define unicorn space, this active space that's like a mythical unicorn, right? Doesn't exist until we reclaim it. Sometimes it's easier to describe it as what the feeling evokes. So the feeling that came up again, back in our word clouds to the top, was a feeling of, I can't believe I just did that. And it kept coming up over and over again. Oh my God, they're saying it again. They're saying it. I can't believe I just did that. And so what I love about that is there's surprise in it. There's a little bit of rebel in you to push back against those societal permissions. There's pride. How many of us get in, I can't believe I just did that? I'm sure you felt that way when you upload your first episode of this podcast. This is a unicorn space. I would put words in your mouth, right? You have curiosity, you connect with your guests so beautifully, and then you complete it, right? You and our friend Jeff here, right? You have to edit it. You have to upload it. You have to be able to be judged by it. those are things that are not easy to do. And so that's really the gift I would like to give. Instead of overwhelm and boredom, I want to hand all of your listeners, and I can't believe I just did that experience, because that is a unicorn space. And often you don't get that again from just, it's beautiful to take the walk, a walk with your dog, but you're not going to get that type of feeling unless you have that curiosity, connection, and completion all together.
What comes up for me with the third C, completion, that I can imagine some of my listeners, I feel like I can hear their voices in their head. What do you mean completion? What does it mean to complete something? Like Jen is creating out loud with this podcast. She's been doing it for a really long time. She's not afraid. That's not true. Sometimes I am. But people, so many of the women that I work with, they're afraid to complete things. They're afraid to share it. That doesn't sound fun to a lot of people.
Nope. And creativity is not always fun.
That's right.
That's the other thing. It's hard. That's why I can't believe I just did that. It wouldn't be, if it was so easy, you wouldn't be saying that to yourself. You wouldn't have that pride in yourself, that internal self-worth that we're talking about. But what's so fascinating that you just said that, Jen, is that it was so interesting to me, because I really genuinely thought from the fair play research that the first C, the curiosity C, was going to be the hardest hurdle. And it's true. Because I had a lot of research that showed, especially people who were stuck with the unpaid labor in the home, that's where the fair play concepts come in, were saying to me things like, curiosity. Well, first of all, that's for children. Or curiosity. Well, one woman, I was laughing, she said to me, well, the only thing I'm curious about, Eve, is scrolling my friend's Venmo transactions. Back then when she said it, I didn't know you could do that. And now I realize my friends use they eat a lot of sushi. They eat a lot of freaking sushi.
I did not know you can do that. I cannot imagine going on Venmo and seeing what my friends have been spending money on, but
it's so weird. Anyway, so she said that and we laughed, obviously. But what was so interesting so I thought that that's where the hurdle would be, this curiosity hurdle of saying, and it's true, there was a passion gap. What was interesting in the research in my interviews and now we're at 750 that we track in a CRM, but we're at thousands of anecdotal interviews. But what we found, and that was in 17 countries, that there's a passion gap. If you have lost your creativity, your unicorn space, what makes you in these roles of the 3 Ps, the parenting, the partnering, the professionalizing. And by P, professional, I mean anybody who works for pay, who works unpaid in the home. There is a passion gap, and it kept coming up around 4th grade. It was very interesting. Someone would say, I don't know what I'm curious about anymore. And often it was around 4th grade, their kids
that they lost
exactly. So there was some correlation in the interviews between 10 years, having kids for 10 years and a passion gap. But what was equally interesting was the resistance to completion. There were almost an equal or even more, especially women, who said to me, I have ideas, I am curious, but I'm a graveyard of unfulfilled dreams.
Yes.
And one woman said that to me, and she said, all you have to do, Eve, is look at my GoDaddy account and all of the domain names that I registered to see that I am a graveyard of unfulfilled dreams. And so I said to her, okay, well, why? And it's exactly what you said. There is a fear that completion has to be excellence. And I'll tell you one quick story that was really interesting to me that I didn't get into the book, because as we all know, manuscripts have to be, and you know this from your beautiful work, manuscripts have to be delivered. And sometimes you're even still interviewing and you're like, why can't I just get one more thing in? But when I interviewed, I was fascinated by Bob Ballard, because this is the man who discovered the Titanic. And I wanted to find people who did things that were like the epic of their dreams. I was looking for, so I ended up using him. Even though I had some Olympic athletes as well, I was looking for someone who got the gold medal, who did their wildest dreams. So I used Bob Ballard because I liked his interview the best in the book. And he's the man who discovered the Titanic. That was his ultimate dream from his entire life. When he was 5 years old, he wanted to be Captain Nemo. He wanted the biggest discovery you could find. And the Titanic was the biggest discovery at the time. Now he says it's Amelia Earhart's plane, but he found the Titanic. And I remember him saying to me, well, what do you do? do you do like most Olympic athletes do and enter a spiral of depression or hedonic, pursuits where
Mhm.
you end up, spiraling? And again, whether it's drug use, we see that with Olympic athletes, or amassing homes and the pursuits that society tells us are supposed to be the ones that signal excellence, like a better house, 2.5 kids. He said, he could have gone down that route. But what he said to me was so interesting. He said, look, I completed something. I was really excellent at my dream. So now I can play. I have permission to fail the rest of my life.
Hmm.
I wish we could look at it that way. Instead of saying, well, I had to have a podcast that has to be as excellent as what I did before. It has to be the number one podcast on Apple. What if we just were able to say with our creativity, I was excellent. I did that thing. I fulfilled a dream. And now the rest of my life, completion can just mean the active pursuit of my creativity. I think it frees us a lot from believing that creativity, that completion has to be excellence.
But what about the person listening who says, I've never fulfilled my dream?
Well, that person, we're going to start from very small steps. What that person has to understand is that society has been conspiring against you, probably from the moment you woke up, to have extrinsic milestones that
Mhm.
were supposed to fulfill you. And so I think it's actually really important for that person who says, I've never been able to fulfill my dreams, is to understand that you're not alone, that this is not about self-help. This is about mutual aid. It's about understanding that you start with the return to that middle C that we never talk about, because people always say, well, yeah, connection, blah, blah, blah. But it's the connection. We're meaning seeking individuals. If you're somebody who says, I've never fulfilled that dream, I would say you have to start with that second C of connection. Why do you want to share yourself with the world? In unicorn space, I identify 7 motivations. And what's so fascinating is that so many people actually start with that, Jen. They start with saying, okay, I may never have fulfilled my dreams because now I realize they were dreams of other people's. They were my father's dreams. I am a professional golfer because my father wanted me to be that. Or I was supposed to be, a great writer because my parents, wanted me to get my PhD, but now I don't know what to do with it. So often it's because someone else has set those dreams for us. And when you can return to why you want to share yourself with the world, is it because you have a skill you want to pay forward to somebody else? Is it because you have a beautiful thing in your past? Like my friend who has Hindu astrology in her past, and she finally realized she wanted to pass that down to her kids and learn to read charts because she didn't want her grandmother and her uncle to die with family
I love
knowledge.
that story in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, when you can realize why you want to share yourself with the world. Is it that you want to teach? Is it that you need a serendipitous community? A lot of introverts I found said they want to share themselves with the world quietly. So surfing, for example, I want to be in a community of others who commune with nature, but I don't have to talk to anybody. So because you want to be in a serendipitous community of people who can do things like you? Is it because you want to be accountable to somebody else because you've never been able to finish something without being accountable? So you need a accountability partner. When you think about why you want to share or need to share, often then you can work yourself back to what that dream can be, because now you know what you need to accomplish it.
And what your true desire is, which is something
Exactly, which so
that
many of us
is,
don't know.
no, it's a huge part of what I work on with people. Uh, it's a constant challenge to excavate that desire and also let it continue to grow and change. Because as you said, you take action on it, you grow and change by taking the action. You change when you complete something and you step back and you go, who am I now? And what do I know now? You're different.
Absolutely. I would say, right. Like my creativity was trying to solve, it was me search. There was a time where I was so excited to understand and unpack why no one had really treated the home as their most important organization. Why do we have 50 years of organizational management research that's never been applied to the home? That was a really, really curious, interesting question. So for years, I stayed in curiosity, years and years and years. And that meant interviewing everybody. Like I said, I probably have the longest longest, biggest unpaid labor, in qualitative data set in the world, because I couldn't stop interviewing, to the point where my colleague Pam Stone, a famous sociologist, said, Eve, you've hit a saturation point. You have to stop asking the same question over and over again. You can predict people's answers. I was so obsessed with the curiosity. And then one day I decided I wanted to share myself with the world. That was it. I said, this is too important. It's helping Seth and me. There's too many couples who are my beta testers. I want to share this with the world. That's the scary part. But I knew, because it was this pay it forward, I wanted to have no other generation come behind me that had struggled with the same issues that Seth and I struggled with, that ultimately it became a completion. The completion just became cards that I started to test. And then the completion became an article I wrote. And then the completion became 2 chapters in a book. So like you said, it doesn't mean I sat there and said, I'm going to be my big, hairy, audacious goal. Or I call it my big, hairy, audacious, authentic goal, because often our goals are set by others. So make sure it's authentic to you. Was never to be a gender division of labor specialist. That's not what I had in my 3rd grade. What do you want to be when you grow up board? It had astronaut there. So like you said, I needed to grow and change with my passions, with my curiosities. And that's okay. As long as there is some version of a completion, so that you can wake up and say, I can't believe I just did that. And it doesn't have to be as big as selling a book, even though Jen and I have that in common. I had one woman recently who said, okay, I get it. I get it. Stop making me part of your data set. And I kept giving her the homework assignment, the small step of come back to me with one day in the next month, where you tell me the most important thing you did that day was outside of your roles as a parent and or partner and or professional. Just one day. So she kept really having a hard time with the word important, because she's like, well, nothing's going to be as important as raising my kids. I'm like, okay, important is not where I want you to get stuck. Just tell me you came back and you said, I did something as important as those 3 Ps. She kept getting stuck. And finally, she jumped into the Atlantic Ocean with a polar bear club. She saw an ad with her local Y. She said, I'm doing it. I'm signing up for the polar bear. It means her husband, she's in a hetero-cisgender marriage, had to take care of their kids on a Saturday by himself. That's still subversive in this society for men to take care of kids alone without the help of a babysitter or a mother-in-law to help. He took care of their kids alone. And she spent Saturday jumping into the Atlantic Ocean.
I love that for an example. I love that. And that's completion. And
Completion.
she knew the moment of completion.
She did, because she said, I finally understood what you meant, Eve. I said, I got out of that damn ocean. I said, I can't believe I just fucking did that. So I was like, that's it. That's the phrase I want you to have. And she did it. So
I love that.
I love her. Thank you. Shout out for you coming back and working with me and telling your story to us. But there's so many like that, people who are doing really interesting things, and it's never too late.
What if you don't know what your unicorn activity? We touched on that a little bit, but I just want to go back. So I know we're going to be curious. I do believe that we actually do know, but we're not stopping to notice, pay attention. We expect it to arrive with an angel and a tablet on stone. This is your unicorn activity. Can you just circle around that a little bit for people who are like, well, okay, now you really have me like wanting to do this. But, and I'm clearly creative because I'm listening to this podcast, but.
Well, I love that so much because, well, first they should hire you, but you're probably booked, but yeah. So, but if not, if you want to just start, right. Let's play a game. Why not? Let's play. I love, one of my favorite things is to create games with books, which is why it was so confusing to a publisher to say, what do you mean you want a game about the home in a book? I'm like, well, that's what I want. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to complete that, even if you don't want this book or not. So
now, did the cards, were they in the book as
no,
they were separate.
Yes,
right?
they're separate. Okay. Exactly. So this unicorn space creativity deck is new to, this is a prototype. So this will be new to your listeners. This is nowhere to be found, but it's been really fun because I've been using it back to data to see what I get. And something really interesting has been happening. I won't tell you what's interesting, but just remind me to tell you the interesting change I'm seeing between men and women, people who identify as men and women in how they play. Because I think it's actually really important to that completion point. So don't let me forget that. But let's play. And Jeff, if you're here too, our producer, anybody, or your listeners, if you want to play out with us, what I'm going to do for you, Jen, you're going to be my contestant.
Okay.
This is the game of solitaire.
What can I win?
Exactly. You can win the cards. We will send you a unicorn box. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you 50 choices.
Okay.
And so it's going to take about 3 minutes. You're going to have to listen carefully. Don't blurt out anything until you hear all 50.
Okay. Can I make a note to myself?
Yes, of course. And
Okay.
Jeff, you too. Oh, Jeff is going to play along with us.
Everybody at home, make a note.
Yes. And everybody at home, please play along with us too. And you're going to see what I mean by the return to the values, the motivations that we talked about. So the goal here, don't get hung up with the word passion or hobby. This doesn't have to be a hobby, which we hate that word. It doesn't have to be your passion. This is about creative pursuits or anything that makes you come alive right now. You're vibing with right now. Okay. Ready? 50 cards. Do not blurt out till you're done. And I need you just to pick one. Even if you have like 100 or there's only 50. So even if you had like 10.
Already, I'm feeling just pressure.
Okay, there's pressure. There is pressure in this game because it's a fast game. Outdoors, design, genealogy and lineage, otherworldly pursuits like tarot, finding, collecting, and foraging, restoration and renovation, research and learning, math and sciences, teaching, writing, fashion, event planning, health and wellness, language and anthropology, video games like puzzles, coding, engineering, baking, cooking, building and DIY, arrows and axes. There are a lot of people who choose that, by the way, which I find interesting. Beauty, pottery, florals, gardening/farming, photography, woodworking, metallurgy, music, stitching and needles, art, storytelling, water sports, travel and culture, performing, animals, dance, rhetoric, martial arts, sports with wheels, memories and archiving, running, triathlon, sports with balls, snow sports, theater and production, circus, racing, and or spiritual wellness.
That was fun.
You have to pick one.
I gotta pick one.
And you'll see why. You'll see why what we're going to do with it.
All right, I'm going to be really weird and pick anthropology.
Oh my God. I love that because that's why you and I love each other already. That's one of the ones I always pick. Okay. So I want to know, first of all, tell me why. And this is what you're going to be doing with yourself as listeners when you play this game with us. Tell me why. I'm going to take some notes.
I got a hit from a number, maybe 8 of them. Some of them are things I do now, but one of the things that in my own life, in looking at this overwhelm and not overwhelm and burnout, but overwhelm and boredom place that the pandemic has served us up, is feeling like I have the same thoughts over and over again. I have the same creative projects over and over again, and lacking that curiosity and that freshness. So when you said anthropology, I'm like, I went back to freshman year in college and taking, every anthropology class I could. I went back to being curious about other cultures and 3rd grade, Mesopotamia. And just the idea of something fresh that I think for me, Eve, and maybe this is a secondary question, but so much of my creativity is about producing things that build my business or bring me clients or sell my books. And so to think about something that wouldn't have anything to do with that.
Oh my God, I love that so much.
And like you came up, like running is one of the things I do, but running, I mean, it's definitely for fun, but I don't think of it as a unicorn space for myself. I think of it as something I do that because I'm tough, because I want to age well, because my husband likes to do it with me,
Yeah, those are other extrinsic motivations, not bad ones, but I think you're modeling for people how to think about the cards. Okay. And we'll talk about, so there's 2 different exercises I want to do. So number 1, you start with, we're still in exercise number 1, which is solitaire. Exercise number 2, we're going to call the remix, but exercise 1, you ask yourself, why did I pick that card? Okay. And on a piece of a Post-it, in a journal, you just start writing it down. So I started to hear for you, curiosity, visiting with other cultures, having something fresh learning for the sake of learning as opposed to for your business.
Yep, love that.
And I love how your face just got excited when you said
Mhm.
that. Now, what's so beautiful about that is you already did this because you're well-versed in this, but a lot of people keep it surface level. You already brought it down to values and feelings. And that's what I want people to do. So if you're why you picked the card, you're struggling with why, what feelings and values does it come up with? So what I would say for you is my gift back to you I would write down, or I would send you back a Post-it, or I'd say to you, I want to be your accountability partner, right? Someone, in your life for your curiosity, for your exposure to other cultures, for you feeling like you have a fresh experience, in your life on a weekly, daily basis, and the learning for sake of learning. So then what I could do for you as an accountability partner, you could do for yourself is say, have I learned for the sake of learning this week? Have I been curious this week? Have I had access to other cultures this week, whether it's through books, podcasts, actually going somewhere, planning a trip to do the anthropological studies or the anthropology? And does anything feel fresh? Have I learned anything that feels fresh and new? An aha moment. And the beauty of this is those values and feelings you can have those aha moments while you run. And that's where the exercise 2 comes up. Is there another card? So tell me the other cards that came up for you.
Strangely, tarot. I'm not a very
cool.
woo-woo person. Or I shouldn't say I'm not as woo-woo as I was when I was younger. Performing, ball sports,
Oh, I love it.
and theater.
Well, I love that so much because I think there's so this is how you do the remix. So what I would say to you, if you're feeling stuck, oh, these all feel big, or I'm not willing to take an anthropology class, or you may, for your listeners out there who may have a hard time with those small steps, what I'd say the best thing you can do is look at your secondary cards and figure out how you can remix the two. So like, for example, there is an ology podcast that I like out there.
I love that podcast.
Right. So listen to an episode while you run. That's like a low hanging fruit, right there. We're dealing with language and anthropology and you're running and you're combining them. Or I would say, think about theater. Like I just saw Lehman Trilogies, that's an anthropological study into capitalism. And I would argue it trades in some anti-Semitic tropes. So it wasn't my favorite play, but the point is like, how could you look and see what community theater is in your town and go see a play that has some historical significance to it. So you start playing with the cards, big and small. It becomes really fun. So that's what you ask, if you really need to get unstuck quickly, what I would say, it's so beautiful to use this exercise as a way to get to those values and to say, it may not be running this week. It may not be language and anthropology this week, but I will say, I will not allow you not to feel like you're learning for the sake of learning. You have to do that.
Very fun for me.
Yeah. So
where does the completion, this is so much fun. Where does the completion come in?
Well, again, so what is your completion? I'd say learning for the sake of learning could be as much as understanding that you want to learn about X and you just buy a book about X. It may be that your completion this week in your language and anthropology unicorn space cycle is either curiosity, connection, or completion. And so it may just be that you're in the curiosity phase. You're not at completion yet. You may be in the connection phase where you have a friend who you decide you want to do language and anthropology by learning Italian first. So maybe it's connecting with that friend. But if you're thinking about getting towards a completion, what I would say is that you think about the things that are like when you start to smile, like what is something that, this goal out there that you may end up changing, but something that can be a small step that signals seriousness. So I say small steps signal seriousness. So if it's too small of a step, like I'll go to a bookstore, that's not really signaling seriousness, but a ukulele concert for friends could be a really fun sort of quote unquote small step to learning an instrument if music was your card. For you in language and anthropology, maybe it's presenting on a podcast, one of your episodes, a bonus episode about what creativity looked like for you for learning for the sake of learning. What did you learn for the sake of learning? Or even to your family at a family dinner. But you set those goals that are small steps that signal seriousness though. So they're not too small. They have to signal seriousness to you. So whether it's paying money to sign up for the Babbel app and saying you're going to complete 20 minutes a day. It has to be something enough that you feel is signaling seriousness to yourself.
Got it.
And that's it. That's a completion. One person said to me, look, it was drums. I signal seriousness because I found a drum teacher. I actually bought a drum set. I've only done 4 lessons. Okay. May not be excellence yet, but you did all those things. You completed 4 lessons. That was a unicorn space cycle. So pick another card. Just, if you want to start over, you can. You did curiosity, you did connection with that teacher, and you completed 4 lessons. Then move on if you're done with that cycle. I think that's the beauty of what I hear also in your work, is that creativity is not a stagnant pursuit. And I think so many people think of it as a passion. And so they get stuck with saying, I'm not creative. But what I love about your work, Jen, is that you give people permission to try and to change and to understand it's dynamic and it's a practice. Those are all things that I think are so important that we often don't hear about creativity.
All very true. So speaking of a creative moment, I'm really curious about that transition for you from your professional life to developing fair play. Because so often, just to stay with this unicorn space, because that was your unicorn space.
It was.
And you trusted it, but at some point it became a whole new career for you. What was that transition like?
And then it's not a unicorn space anymore, or you need another unicorn space. And now my unicorn space is 100% dance. And I'm looking for a ballroom partner. So if anybody out there in LA wants to dance with me. I think what happens as a transition to when something that you're passionate about, it's such a privilege, obviously, to be able to have this creative capital that becomes financial capital. I talk about this a lot in communities of color. So many communities of color, their creative capital is often stolen by sort of this white capitalism in a way that doesn't produce financial capital. So it is a big privilege to be able to have creative capital that also turns into financial capital. But what it often does then is it takes out the thing that you said earlier, the learning for the learning's sake. So I do feel that in those situations, it can still be, of course, a wonderful and important and meaningful pursuit. But I do think you have to still bring in those other ones that are done just for the sake of the curiosity, the connection, and the completion. It just, when money gets involved, or the P in the professional sort of creeps in, it's still really important. It can be a unicorn space, but you need more. I'm going to ask you to be more greedy instead of less. You need more unicorn space.
Yeah, I love that. I always tell my clients, be greedy,
more
be
abundance,
greedy. Yeah.
Abundance. And that is a creative mindset, is that it becomes an abundance mindset. And that's what's so beautiful, especially in the fair play context, because the saddest part about fair play was that when I realized that the person who loves you the most resents you the most. And it was happening all over. This idea that when people said I had a unicorn space, they would get eye rolls from their partners. Oh, he's golfing again. Oh my God, spa day for her again. And I'm like, spa day? She's writing her novel. It was this resentment and this rage from the person who's supposed to love you this work that did not want to protect your creative space. And often that happens when that person is not reciprocated. So when you can look at it together as a collective couple and say, hey, do we want to live a life of overwhelm and boredom? Or do we want to live a life of abundance and joy where we both get time to do the things that we love? Yes, it may mean we, buck trends of like intensive togetherness and all this weird stuff people say about our parenting. And that's okay. But I would say the most important thing for a couple, if you're in a couple, is to have time for your own unique unicorn space creative pursuits.
What is your partner's unicorn space?
We laugh. His is building culturally relevant assets. So it's a very interesting. So what Seth loves to do is he loves to find problems in the market and figure out how you can change and solve those problems. So for example, he was obsessed 5 years ago with thinking about dairy cows and, sort of the problem of climate. And then, he came to me and said, okay, learning for learning's sake, researching sake, You can make milk out of oats and it actually tastes really good. And it's not the problem of almonds and water. I was like, ew, what are you talking about? What do you mean milk out of oats? Like the oatmeal? Right. And then anyway, so he ended up investing in Oatly, one of the biggest, companies that makes oat milk now, but he's a futurist. He likes to foresee trends and then try to solve them.
I love it. A lot of people wouldn't think of that as unicorn space. It's a
Yeah,
great
exactly.
example.
Yeah, but he's so curious. It's about the curiosity, that connection. You reach out to that entrepreneur, the person who's doing it,
Mhm.
learning about them. And for completion for him is supporting that person, whether it's through
Mhm.
capital or through connections to other
Mhm.
people.
I could talk to you all day, but I'm aware of our time. So I'm going to ask you my last question. What do you want to learn next, Eve?
Oh my God, that's the best question. What do I want to learn next is why we've never measured unpaid labor in our US gross domestic product. I'm really fascinating, actually, back to learning for learning's sake. I'm an economics major, and anthropology major. So and I did a ton in economics, and law, and that's what I returned to. I returned to that discipline. And so I've been returning to that discipline. And I just got 3 books on time use accounting and trying to understand how do we start measuring our subjective well-being? Because if you look at gross domestic product, Ukraine next year is going to show an increase in GDP. It's a toxic measure.
It is a toxic measure.
It's a toxic measure without context. And
Mhm.
so I'm looking at how do we measure, and I want to learn about how can we measure subjective well-being in a way that's less toxic for our planet, for the people who live on this planet, and for and really that takes into account our well-being. So any economists out there that work on that issue, please feel free to reach out to me and send me any papers, because I'm steeped in that learning right now.
Brilliant. I love it. Yeah. GDP, wrong, bad.
Wrong measure.
A cancer measure, because
Cancer
it's got to
measure.
grow.
It's got to grow.
What's wrong? I mean, whoever thought that was a good idea?
Yes. And so there's some beautiful new economists that are considered quote unquote left-wing economists, even though I'll consider them just really good economists, that are talking about these issues finally, around what the donut economy can look like, what it can look like when we look at life as a donut, as opposed to an upward trajectory mountain where we always have to grow to the point where I feel like, I don't know if you ever watched Price is Right when you were young, but I just had this vision of there's this hiker in Price is Right that goes up and goes up. And if you guess the price wrong, it falls off the mountain. That's what I was just thinking about.
Eve, it's been a delightful, wonderful, illuminating conversation. Thank you so much for your books and for your presence. And I appreciate your time so much.
And same, thank you for devoting your life to creativity.